And so get out that old leaven that you might become new. For Messiah, our Passover, is sacrificed for us. So very clearly, that is one of the several places in the New Testament where Messiah Yeshua is linked directly to the item of the Passover lamb. The ancient Passover lamb was sacrificed for the sin of a household. The greater Passover lamb sacrificed for the sin of the world. So one of the main features here of, and we'll go on, Passover unleavened bread. Of course, in your notes, you can see in the chart that because Passover and unleavened bread, Pesach in Hebrew is Passover, and unleavened bread is Chag HaMatzot. Chag literally means holiday, and HaMatzot is of the unleavened bread. Because one follows directly on the other, it's in essence celebrated as one continuous holiday of 8 days. One continuous holiday of 8 days. So I'm going to ask you to look in your notes as we go on to unleavened bread. There we go. Again, Passover Seders. Let's go back here. Okay. So Exodus. If you would look with me at chapter 12, we've been there for a different reason. Let's go back there to the verses we skipped over. Exodus chapter 12, verse 15 and following. Exodus 12, verse 15 and following. What we need to do there is see the specific instruction as they went forward. One of the things that often confuses believers trying to understand this part of the narrative is they confuse two separate events in time. The two separate events were the first Passover in Egypt versus subsequent Passover celebrations in freedom. Okay? So the first Passover in Egypt, they sacrificed a Passover lamb, put it on the doorway. That was only done one time. They didn't keep doing that. There was no reason to do that. But they were told to continue to only eat the unleavened bread. So Exodus chapter 12, verse 15. Let me read a couple of the passages there. In verse 15, it says, 7 days shall you eat unleavened bread, and on the first day you shall remove leaven from your houses. For whoever eats anything leavened from the first day until the seventh day, that person shall be cut off from Israel. Let me just, a quick word. I don't have an illustration here, but the search for leaven actually begins before Passover. I'm going to read a short portion from Dr. Fruchtenbaum's book about the dispute over the dating. And if you thoroughly get immersed in the dispute about the dating of when this begins, your head will spin. And you will realize you're in over your head. So I need to make a few general points, and then I'm going to read a section from Arnold's book about the difficulty of understanding this. Why? Because Hebrew is not a precise language. Hebrew is a relatively coarse language. By coarse, I don't mean rude. It is a language that you have to infer a lot from the context. One single word can be used to cover a lot of ground. Here's an example. I'm told, don't have any experience, I'm told that in the far northern part of Canada, the Inuit people, the Eskimo, the Inuit people, have 20 different names in their language for different types of ice. Is the ice solid and you can drive a truck over it? Is it crackly? Is it cloudy? Is it clear? There's all different types, because that's their world. They need different words for all of that stuff. That's why Yiddish developed such a rich vocabulary of insulting people. I kid you not. When you are crammed on top of one another in the ghetto in some country, human relations kind of become, hyper sensationalized. And that guy is a nudnik. No, most of the insults I cannot say because we have a few people who know Yiddish, and they're not polite words to use. They're words that describe bodily anatomy. And so they're developed a rich vocabulary in that. Greek developed a very precise vocabulary in describing things. By contrast, Hebrew is relatively coarse. It's like if you have a thermometer that has to cover everything from freezing to boiling, and you only have 100 degrees, but if you do a Fahrenheit, you have about 200 degrees. There's far more fine gradations in that the more you put in there. And Hebrew is simply relatively coarse. So that means that there's going to be honest dispute and honest discussion about the interpretation, about even the translation, and what it means by when it says, on the morrow after the Sabbath. Does that mean a high holy day, or is it literally the seventh day of the week? Both sides will give you their talking points. And maybe if I develop additional intelligence, I'll be able to come to you with an absolute, but I'm going to show you both sides. And so with that, back to Exodus chapter 12, I get very easily distracted because I get excited. The material is very interesting, and it confirms our faith in Messiah. So in Exodus chapter 12, the search for leaven in verse 15 actually starts before Passover. It doesn't start like after Passover. It starts before several days. There are ceremonies in the Jewish community. If you go into any truly Orthodox community, if you go into Crown Heights or Williamsburg, where my father grew up on the border of Williamsburg and Bushwick, you will see on side streets, several days before Passover, small bonfires. Like they'll put them in dumpsters, and the police are watching and guarding that no one interferes. And the fires are there to facilitate the burning of the leaven. You're supposed to go through your house, and there's all sorts of rituals. People who want to make believe it's 300 years ago, they'll take a candle so that they can see. Never mind, they've got a big flashlight. They'll take a candle and, of course, a feather, because that's the way great-great-great-great-great-grandfather did it. And that's still done to this day in the most modern of houses. The tradition is to take a candle, to take a feather, and to look for leaven. In order to facilitate the fact that you can find leaven, a smart Jewish housewife will strategically place little obvious packets of leaven so that the kids are very excited. They helped. They found the leaven. And this is always done. She'll place packets of leaven, breadcrumbs or something, so the kids can say, yes, they found it. Once again, we're reminded that so much of the narrative was meant to inculcate these traditions into the minds of the young people. That's why the Passover Seder is such an involved sort of theatrical event with different cups and different stories. It's made for an impression upon the young people, provided they can remain awake. And so there is this search for leaven, then there's the burning of leaven. And let me tell you something strange that you're going to find. This is legal fiction. Sometimes legal fiction is employed when actually removing the leaven would be a problem. So let's say someone owns a bakery. Okay, you own a big bakery, you make all kinds of stuff for the modern world. It's not a kosher bakery, it's just a general bakery. But you keep kosher, you're a Shomer Shabbos. You own all that yeast, all of that leavened bread. And that's a problem because you're not supposed to own any leaven. You're supposed to clear out all the leaven. And so in the Jewish community, there is this function of finding a good-natured Gentile friend who's very trustworthy and selling him the factory for $1 for a total of 8 days. Okay? This is done all the time. Now it's done online. I'm serious. This is what they do. It used to be a whole ceremony. They'd have an Italian guy who they've known for years. He might be the foreman of the factory, and they'll sell the factory to him for $1. And then, of course, they have a big ceremony after Passover. He comes, and he sells it back to them for $1. It's legal fiction, but it absolves the Orthodox Jewish person who owns the place. No longer does he own the leaven. And so there are several of these types of legal fictions that you see in modern-day Judaism, Orthodox Judaism. Back to the text. Verse 16, Exodus 12:16. On the first day you shall have a holy assembly, and another holy assembly on the seventh day. No work at all shall be done on them, except what must be eaten by each person. That alone may be prepared by you. By this verse, we learn several things. That the entire time of the Feast of Unleavened Bread is 7 days. Now, again, there's a dispute in how you count it, and so I probably should read that first to give you a sense of how strategic this is. There really is a gigantic dispute about how you begin the counting. Different groups count it different ways. For the most part, the Pharisaic tradition has taken over. But from Arnold's book, The Feasts and Fasts of Israel, by Dr. Arnold Fruchtenbaum, say it for the record, on page 85, regarding the start of the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And this is, for those of us who grew up thinking that it was a certain specific day, all of a sudden, the uncertainty is a little jarring. Quote, exactly on which day of Nisan the feast was supposed to begin was one of the major points of debate between the Pharisees and Sadducees. The issue was whether Chag HaMatzot began on the 15th day of Nisan and continued to the 21st day of Nisan, or began on the 16th day of Nisan and ended on the 22nd day of Nisan. It's only one day, but it changes how you begin the observance. The position of the Pharisees was that it began on the 15th, and that's generally the position of most in rabbinical Judaism today. While the Sadducees opted for the 16th day of the month. Basically, the Pharisees made Pesach equal to the first day of Chag HaMatzot, whereas the Sadducees separated the two by 1 day. And Arnold goes on to say here, biblically speaking, the Sadducees were correct. The problem is almost no one follows the Sadducean way of doing it these days. And so for those who propose this, you are swimming up the river against the tide, and it becomes difficult. So biblically speaking, the Sadducees were correct, the Pharisees were not. Today, the rabbis follow the Pharisaic view. Read it for yourself, because that then will affect how many of the spring holidays are enumerated and how they are celebrated. So it adds yet another wrinkle to the endless debate that sometimes goes on here. Exactly when did they do this holiday? The one thing I think for which the evidence is overwhelming is a Friday crucifixion of the Messiah. I don't think you can get around that. No matter how you play with the dates, you're still looking at a Friday crucifixion, and anyone who has taken Life of Messiah course here understands the Jewish method of counting time. Any portion of 1 day accounts for a full day. So even if there was a few hours, it would count as though it was 24. It was evening, it was morning, Yom Echad. And so this is something that is going to influence our understanding of Scripture. So going on in the passage, Exodus 15, unleavened bread. Verse 17, you shall observe the feast of unleavened bread, for on this very day I brought your hosts out of the land of Egypt. Therefore you shall observe this day throughout your generations as a permanent ordinance. In the first month, on the 14th day of the month, again, it almost seems contradictory. And greater minds than mine, which are most minds, have failed to unravel this sort of conundrum. And so I am not going to lay down that it's absolutely this or it's absolutely that. It's more important that you are aware that there is a discrepancy in between the way it's celebrated in traditional rabbinical Judaism, which is basically descended from the Pharisees. That's important for you to understand. The modern day rabbinical Judaism of any time period, is directly descended from the Pharisees. Only two groups survived the destruction of Jerusalem. The Sadducees did not. The Sadducees were tied to the temple. They were salaried by the temple. All of their work detail revolved around the temple. When the temple was surrounded and destroyed and 1 million Jewish people were killed, the Sadducees were kaput. The two groups that survived the destruction, however, were the Pharisees, because the Pharisees were dispersed around the Jewish world. Pharisaical Judaism was portable, because Pharisaic Judaism began during the Babylonian captivity. During the Babylonian captivity, they were forced to adapt to a situation where they no longer had a temple. So Judaism became portable under the Pharisaic view. You now have this new institution of rabbis and synagogues during this intertestamental period. However, when they were able to go back, anyone who was of the priestly line said, hey, we're in charge again. We're going to put the temple back up, and we're going to be the new bosses because that's who we are. We're Levites. And so that existed for a short time. It's called the Second Temple period. In academic circles, just as you should know, it's not called the intertestamental period because they don't believe there was another testament. It's called the Second Temple period. And that's accurate. I would also call it the intertestamental period for clarity for most people. But it parallels the time during which the Second Temple existed, which was far smaller than the First Temple, the Temple of Solomon. And so this holiday of Pesach and unleavened bread, that go continuous, no bread of any sort, no leavening of any sort is to be found in Jewish homes. Just a quick heads up, there are regional differences about what is considered leaven. The most famous example, the example that's always cited, is the fact that Jews of Sephardic origin, quickly explain that, around the year 700, 800 AD, there were opportunities. You could do good business in Spain, and the people who ran Spain said, we'd like you Jewish people to come here because you know about import and export, and wherever you go, the rising tide lifts all boats, and so all the economy is going to be helped. You're going to bring science, you're going to bring mathematics, and they did. And so for about 500 years, there was a time period known as the Golden Age of Spanish Jewry. My wife's ancestors were part of that. They lived in Spain. It's very possible that I have one of all my 4 Jewish grandparents. One has a name that is suspiciously like she was Sephardic, okay? And when I first saw it on the death certificate of my mother's younger brother, I almost could not believe it because everyone said she always spoke Yiddish. Yiddish is the language of Europe, but yet her name was a Sephardic name. She spoke Yiddish. She was within the Jewish community. She always spoke Yiddish. But there were many Sephardim. In 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue, and all the Jews were also kicked out. That was the final edict of Ferdinand and Isabella, not such nice kings and queens, who kicked out all the Jewish people at the instigation of the Roman Church. And so from that, in particular, my wife's family sailed across the Mediterranean because the town of Izmir was very welcoming in Turkey. And so for 400 years, my wife's ancestors, before they came to America, lived in Izmir, Turkey, which is biblical Smyrna. When you see the town of Smyrna, that is currently named Izmir. And at one time, there was a very large Jewish population there. And so all that was to say that they have different customs. The biggest one is rice. For some reason, Sephardim don't consider rice to be like a grain that can be leavened. And so they're allowed to eat rice in any sort of way. And you'll find that during Passover time. They don't consider rice to be something that is capable of being leavened. And so they will eat rice. Ashkenazic Jews will not eat rice, and they have a very, very narrow, limited sort of range. I remember as a kid growing up in the City Housing Project in Brooklyn, it was about 85% Jewish during most of my years up until around age 16 or 17. And the mothers of my friends would have boxes of matzah that they would put in the lobby of the apartment buildings so that you wouldn't be tempted to eat any treif. A treif is something that's not kosher, that you wouldn't be tempted to go to the store and buy something that was treifidic, that was not right for Passover. So they would actually voluntarily put boxes of matzah, and that's how you knew the buildings around us. It was almost like a Jewish ghetto in the 1960s, but it was attempting to keep us all on the straight and narrow. And so there's going to be regional differences. There's going to be ways in which they will make matzah palatable. My father used to make matzah brai all the time, which is using matzah and eggs and frying it in the pan, various spices, matzah brai, and all different sorts of dishes that go with that. With these leavening sorts of agents, it was a wonderful reminder. Again, we've just read, take out that old leaven that you might become new, for Messiah, our Passover, is sacrificed for us. And so, if you would look at, once again, the chart, because these holidays are celebrated consecutively in the Jewish community, the first and the second day of Passover are considered sacrosanct. You are supposed to take off from school. You're not allowed to do anything. Then the last 2 days of the holiday, 7 and 8, are also considered holy days. The first 2 days and the last 2 days. The middle days are something that is called in Hebrew chol ha'amod. Chol is something that is ordinary. Chodesh v'chol. Something that is chol is ordinary. It's not sacred. And so these are the ordinary days in the middle of the Passover week. Jewish schools are out, and if you go into any of the Orthodox neighborhoods, they hold what will look to you like carnivals in the middle of the street. Oftentimes in Jewish neighborhoods, the entire streets are blocked off for the celebration of various holidays, even for the celebration of weddings. There are certain neighborhoods in Brooklyn where they will close the entire street, they will put up a portable stage in the middle of the street, and they will have a wedding because it's considered to be a good omen, excuse the expression. It's considered to be a fortuitous sort of thing to hold the wedding out in the open, to have the entire community as witnesses. And if you look at some of the videos, you'll see people hanging out their window, just like wishing the bride and groom well. And this is something that's very unique to the traditional Orthodox Jewish community. So once again, the original celebration here is the exodus from Egyptian slavery and God's supply of our needs. And the Messianic fulfillment clearly is just as the Passover lamb took away the sin of a single household, so the Passover lamb, the greater Passover lamb, the one whom John pointed to, is the one who takes away the sin of the world. And in your handouts here, and one or the other of them, is my article. Yes, in the charts handout, there's an entire article that I wrote about some of these connections. So this is many years I've been using this, and it has been used of the Lord in good way. Tomorrow, just to kind of prep you, we are going to go on to, in your notes, Chag HaBikurim. Chag HaBikurim, this holiday of first fruits. Once again, this is something that's not going to be familiar to a lot of people. Actually, it was not all that popular in the Jewish community until recent years when Israel became an agricultural powerhouse. It's basically an agricultural holiday. If you look at your notes, you'll see there the phrase first fruits. It's the first fruits of the barley harvest. Okay, be careful, because just a little bit later there is the first fruits of the wheat harvest. So again, first fruits, number 3 in your outline in the chart. That's the first fruits of the barley harvest. Oftentimes in certain places in Israel, the barley grows over the winter and it's harvested in the spring. And then 50 days later, the first fruits of the wheat harvest. Again, that's very easy to get those confused. But more and more, because Israel is an agricultural nation, we're seeing a resurgence of these agricultural holidays. When we all lived in ghettos in the 1600s and shtetls and the Pale of Settlement, we didn't, for the most part, there was no way to celebrate these agricultural holidays. We were also too poor. And then the people who were wealthy were living in cities, so they didn't celebrate it. It's tied to the land. We're back on the land, and we're seeing a resurgence and a rebirth of all of these holidays. They are celebrated big time in Israel. So that's where we'll pick up tomorrow evening. Be well.